Welcome back, everybody. My name is Gammatrap, one word, and today we're taking an image from grayscale, or black and white, into color. Now, a lot of artists like to work from color from the ground up, but also a lot of artists like to make pieces grayscale, black and white, and then add the color later. Now, they do this so they have a lot of value control. So they have control over the blacks, the whites, the highlights, the shadows, and whatnot. So if we're going to take a look, this is the image. I just finished this image, by the way, and I'll make a time lapse of it pretty soon. But this is our image that we're going to be taking from black and white into color. Now, I already made this into the color and I've added some effects and stuff, but we're not really going to do in those like focal effects. Like right here, you'll see that the ghost and all this stuff is in focus, whereas this stuff's very out of focus. It really draws the attention. There's also that 3D glasses kind of effect I really enjoy. But we're not going to be doing that right now. We're just going to be focusing on the color. But I made this in Procreate, and I make a lot of my pieces now. I start them in Procreate. I do the values in Procreate, the blacks and whites and grays and whatnot. And I do that because I like how the brushes work in Procreate. Like Procreate was built from the ground up around brushes, I think, whereas Photoshop was built from the ground up around like photo manipulation and color correction, which is kind of why I make it in Procreate, but then I move them into Photoshop to do the coloring and the overall lighting and whatnot. This, for example, is what I ended up with in Photoshop. So it's perfectly possible to take your image from black and white and add colors and effects to it. Now, you don't have to work with just one layer, but I'm doing this to make sure that you can see that if you can do this with one layer, you can do this with 50 or however many layers you got. It's more control the more layers you have, yes, but it's not necessary. Now I'm going to get my face out of the way just so you can see the layers and stuff behind me, and I might pop in a little later, all right? So first and foremost, you always make a copy, no matter what you're working on. If it's 50 layers, you make a copy of each layer you're affecting, just in case, you know. And then you can merge them all down and stuff later. And so obviously, if you're working with one layer, you definitely want to make a copy, because if you mess up and you continue on 50 steps or however many steps in Photoshop, you might not be able to back up in case you decide you don't like something. Always just a good idea to keep a copy, so you can just delete it if you don't like it and just start over. So in Procreate or in Photoshop, for example, you might be working on the black and whites, and you might be working on them for like 10 hours or so, and your eyes are very used to seeing this. So a good idea is from time to time to let Photoshop sort of take the reins and see what it can think of. So if you go to image and in one of these auto tone, contrast, or colors, it'll give you like, oh, and it'll try and balance the cool colors with the warm colors, or the lights and the darks and whatnot. So if you go to auto contrast, you'll see that it automatically brightens up the center, because that's, you know, it thinks that it probably should be brighter right there. And it also, I think, darkens up the no, it didn't darken anything. Now, this is interesting, and it's always a good idea to try out. But for me, it kind of washes out this ghost eye here. So you see, it's much more defined in this version. So something you could do is maybe add a mask and just mask out that version. So you see, I kind of, it's sort of like erased, but it's a little safer. So if you wanted to keep the new version of things, the slightly brighter version, then you can. You don't have to, obviously. In fact, I might drop the opacity down. It's sort of like a combination of the two. I'm going to make another copy so I can merge all this down. And now I have a new layer of the new stuff. And here comes the slightly more interesting part, right? Here comes the color. This might be a little complicated, but feel free to pause the video at any point and work along with me. It's always best if you're working along with me at the same time while you're doing this. Just keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here, and these are our adjustment layers. For starters, I like to do gradient maps just to see, you know, an overall change. You can use gradient maps or LUTs, but at the moment we're using gradient maps. So when we added a gradient map, it gives us this layer here. Now if we double click this little thumbnail here where it shows the gradient, it's going to pull this up. You have a couple controls here, right? I obviously don't want to worry too much about dither, but reverse will just change the polarity of the gradient. So see here, the very darkest value is this. It replaces the black on this image, right? And the very light color is this sort of aqua, right? Very, very kind of bright cyan. So if we click this color bar right here, right, the gradient bar, here is our control. So we can slide these around and control every aspect of the gradient map that we really want. Now, if you double click these little colored squares right here, you can get your little color picker and it can change anything you want. That's what I mean. You can create any gradient map that you would like. Usually, I prefer to keep it, for starters, because some can get weird, to have the brightest value go down to the darkest value, right? You could change it up to where you can have like various bright and dark values kind of like spread in between, but that's not usually what I try to do. All right, so this bright color, let's make it a kind of like just more cyan, more teal, right? And then this darker color, I kind of want this very dark purple, almost black purple, right? And if we make a middle color, and just by clicking on the bar below, you can make another option, blue, I think. Something like that. And you hit OK, and that's your new gradient. Now, this is a layer on its own, right? It's an adjustment layer, so you can change the opacity. You can add as much of this gradient as you would like. So there, we're just going to drop the opacity down. I don't want it to be too much. You always want to try and start with like as least color as possible, and then slowly, in little incremental steps, add more color. So now, there are no rules to this, okay? If you look here, I've got one gradient map. We can add more. Let's just grab some random orange one. All right, so now here's the cool part. This is the gradient's mask. Now, the way masks work is, black conceals, white reveals. So we're going to take our black color, get a paint bucket tool, make sure the mask is selected, and click on it. And it fills that mask in. All right, so if we switch our colors to white, and now we got a brush, we can brush that color back in. And we can change the blending mode to make it blend a little better. So let's say overlay. Now, because we're doing all this stuff in Photoshop with adjustment layers, none of this is really permanent, right? That's the best part. So if we wanted to come back up here and change this map, we totally can. Maybe make it pink. We can make this more red. And now we're getting sort of a dark elf kind of color scheme, And not only that, because these are just adjustment layers, we can still affect this main layer, this main image here. And I think I drew this guy's head a little too wonky, so we're just gonna move it over a bit. Now, there we go, see? So now back onto this mask real quick, painting some white on it so it shines through. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take both of these and we're going to group them together so we can just turn those colors on and off. Now here's a really cool trick of adding like a stroke of sunlight. Like those images where you just like, see just some person and there's like a beam of just pure like sunlight. You can do that with these other layers here, with these adjustment layers. So what we need to do is add the adjustment layer. And we're probably going to go with levels. Okay, first we're going to make a levels adjustment layer. And we want those levels to be bumped up a lot. Not like crazy. You still want the white to be, just white, but we want to maybe bump up the shadows a bit. So now it's very washed out, right? That's kind of what we want at the moment. And then we're going to make another one for color balance. And we're going to give it a little bit of warmth, right? We're going to add some yellow. We're going to add some red. Now, we're going to take these two new layers and we're going to group them together. Okay, so we turn that on and off. And we're going to give it a mask. Trust me, I know this is very confusing for some of y'all, but just follow along and it'll make a lot of sense, okay? We're grouping these adjustment layers together. So specifically, if we alter these various things, we just alter those adjustments. So again, same like what we did with the mask before. We'll take our color, make it black, select that mask, get our bucket tool, just click it on, okay? So now our mask is completely concealed. And we're going to switch over to our other color here, white. Now watch this. You see the magic of adjustment layers and masks? Now all we have to do is just make sure that it makes sense, right? So the light source is coming down and there's this partially concealed shadow over this player's hood right here, and the light's just hitting the top, and it's concealing this part right here, the shadows, and then it's just grazing the bottom of the player's helmet down here, and we can just continue this light source all the way down and make it touch everything we need. And all we're doing is just with our white brush, we're just brushing in the mask right here, okay? We're not doing anything crazy. And we're just gonna make that mask a little brush a little bigger. And we're just gonna put some light on the chest area, not too much. And we're gonna add a little bit of color to the blade of the knife to really separate it from the body. And we're gonna add a little bit right there. Now you can just press X to change from white to black relatively quickly. So while you're painting, you can just press X, conceal, press X again, reveal, you know. Now with that, now we can just kind of throw some more colors on this thing. So we'll add a regular layer, and let's give this one some warm, right, some orange, and we're just gonna add some, like a linear dodge, and we'll make sure this brush is a little more gentle, drop its flow and opacity. And all this does is just adds a little extra of the color, right? So if you're gentle with it, it'll treat you right. Just gonna make sure some of the areas of this hood are highlighted. Now, there's one other thing that can make your process just a little bit faster, and we're going to make another adjustment layer, and this one's going to be a color lookup. This will bring up your LUTs, L-U-T. Now, if you don't like sliding those gradients and stuff around, or you don't like picking them, or you don't have any very good ones, or you're not very inspired by the ones you do have, almost all Photoshop just comes with some basic LUTs, and these things will change pretty much everything about your image, and it usually uses sort of the same sort of technology that gradient maps work. So all you have to do is just click one, right, and you can just hit the down key, and it scrolls through all these various looks, and it just changes the colors and it changes the values. So you might find something that you think really sets the tone, sets the mood, really helps out, because there's some like horror-based ones. There's some soft, warm kind of like spring looks. There's some cool winter kind of colors. There's this late sunset, one of my favorites. I never use it, but I love it. You know, there's some that change from daylight kind of colors to nighttime kind of colors. So it makes them very dark, very sort of washed out in blue, and it goes all the way down to underwater sort of stuff. Tension green's a typical one for like underwater. So if you just use these things, gradient maps, LUTs, adjustment layers, and you can change any grayscale image to a full colored piece to make it, you know, as interesting or as vibrant as you need. Now, the cool thing about this is, like, there's no real rules, right? If you take your images from grayscale, from Procreate into Photoshop, add some color, you can then take them back into Procreate and then brush with the colors that you've selected. Usually when I add colors, it's either my last step or my like middle step, because sometimes if I don't think these tools, the adjustment layers, the LUTs, the gradient maps, if I don't think those give my piece the love it needs, or it doesn't quite, you know, get it to where it needs to be, the full render, I'll then start brushing, picking the colors. Like I'll grab that color right there, and I'll just start brushing it in, just like any other. Grab that color right there, start brushing it in, just like any other piece. So if you work mostly with grayscale and you've been hesitant to touch colors because you don't quite understand how, like, you love them, and sometimes you've made some cool pieces with vibrant and beautiful colors and you're just not entirely sure how you did it, this is just a really cool way to play around, not affect the piece in a dangerous kind of way to where you can't go back, and this lets you sort of experiment with how you then want to proceed with the coloring of your piece. Maybe you may want it to be dark and broody. Maybe you want to add this cool lighting effect with the partially concealed light. Who knows? So if you'd like to see the time lapse of this piece, you can do so in the description below. It's mostly just grayscale, black and whites and stuff to the very end. A lot of my videos have kind of been like that, and some people are like, it just becomes colored at the end. I don't understand how that, this is how. I make it in Procreate in black and white to control the values, and I move it into Photoshop and I adjust the colors. For some of them. Some of them I do the whole midway through and color and then go back and start painting on them, but a lot of them, for time, I need to go ahead and make them in Procreate and then move them into Photoshop. Thank you to my amazing patrons. Without your support, I wouldn't be doing this stuff. And I hope to get all your awards to you very soon. I'm very bad with time management. I apologize. And if you would like to pick up a print of this either through Displate or just my regular prints, you can also do those in the description down below or by going to my website, gammatrap.com. Also, if you like, you can come check me out on Twitch. I stream artwork and games there. You can relax and chill with me live, or you can draw with me. If you have any questions, that's a fantastic time to ask because I can actually show you there live on my screen while I'm working. It's pretty cool. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.